He sat in the wheelchair on the 38th floor, staring out at the Detroit River through a pair of black sunglasses he didn't need. Because Marcus Thorne could see perfectly fine, he just didn't want anyone to know that. 37 years old. A criminal empire stretching from Corktown to Grosse Pointe. 3 high-end restaurants on Woodward Avenue, where diners paid $400 for dinner without knowing their money, passed through 6 layers of shell companies before vanishing into accounts in the Cayman Islands. 1 legal casino in the suburbs. 2 construction companies that laundered more cash than they ever poured concrete. A network so tight, so meticulously built, that the FBI had spent 10 years trying to crack it and never got close. Not once, not even a scratch. He had a fiancé who wore diamonds heavier than her conscience. A right-hand man he'd called brother for 12 years. An army of soldiers who swore loyalty with blood oaths every year on his father's grave in Holy Cross Cemetery. And right now, in this 5,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking the river where freighters crawled like black beetles toward Lake Erie, Marcus Thorne was completely alone. But here was what nobody knew. Not his fiancé, not his underboss, not the FBI, not a single soul breathing in the city 38 floors below. Marcus could see. He could walk. He could stand up right now, cross the room in 4 steps, and pour himself a glass of the 25-year Macallan sitting on the bar cart if he wanted to. The ambush on Jefferson Avenue had been real. 2 black SUVs boxing him in, bullets tearing through armored glass that wasn't armored enough. His driver dead before his foot left the gas pedal. His bodyguard bleeding out in the passenger seat, gurgling words that never became sentences. But the blindness, the paralysis, that was a lie Marcus had constructed with the precision of a man who'd spent his whole life building things that looked solid from the outside and were hollow on the inside. He'd done it for one reason. One question that had been eating him alive since the day he inherited his father's throne 8 years ago. Who around me is here for me? And who's just here for the power I'm holding? Because in Marcus Thorne's world, loyalty was sworn in blood, but blood dries fast, and oaths cost less than a bullet. The penthouse stretched around him like a museum after closing time. $8 million in furniture. A dining table that seated 10 where he always ate alone. Abstract paintings on the walls he'd never understood and never bothered to pretend he did. Floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the Detroit skyline into a postcard he'd stopped seeing years ago. 5,000 square feet of everything money could buy, and nothing money couldn't. No laughter, echoing off the Italian marble. No footsteps in the hallway. No voice calling his name. No hand reaching for his in the dark. Just the hum of the air purifier. The whisper of wind slipping through the seal of the glass. The slow, mechanical breathing of a home that had never learned how to be a home. Marcus sat in the wheelchair, black sunglasses reflecting the gray October sky. And behind those dark lenses, his eyes were wide open, watching, measuring, counting the silence the way other men counted money. And in the penthouse hanging suspended above the Detroit skyline, Marcus Thorne was completely alone, even though he could stand up and walk away anytime he wanted. 5 weeks earlier, Jefferson Avenue was slick with October rain. The kind of rain just heavy enough to make the asphalt reflect headlights like a black river running parallel to the real one. The Detroit River crawled beside them, dark and indifferent, carrying freighters toward destinations that didn't matter to anyone in the armored Escalade. Marcus sat in the back seat, eyes closed, head resting against the window. The leather was cold through his suit jacket. He was thinking about the meeting that had just ended at the steakhouse on Griswold Street, where he'd shaken hands with a Michigan state senator. That handshake was worth $200,000 wired to a foundation that existed only on paper. Eddie Marsh, his driver for 8 years, was talking. His voice carried that proud tone of a quiet man who suddenly had too much to say. She got the letter yesterday, Mr. Thorne. Full scholarship, University of Michigan, pre-med. Eddie's hands were steady on the wheel, but his voice wasn't. First one in my family to go to college. First one to even finish high school, if I'm being honest. Marcus opened his eyes just enough to see the back of Eddie's head in the rearview mirror. Gray hair at the temples now. 53 years old. 3 grandchildren. A wife named Dolores, who sent Marcus a Christmas card every year with a handwritten note he never read. That's good, Eddie. Real good. Ray Whitmore sat in the passenger seat, silent as always. His eyes swept the side mirrors every 4 seconds, front mirror every 6. The rhythm of a man who'd spent 20 years expecting bullets and had caught 3 of them in his lifetime. He never talked about his family because he didn't have one. Never talked about much of anything, really. Marcus couldn't remember exactly when he realized something was wrong. Maybe it was when Eddie stopped mid-sentence, his words dissolving into nothing. Maybe it was when the headlights behind them grew too close, too fast. Maybe it was when Ray's hand moved toward his hip, a motion so familiar it was almost invisible. But when two black SUVs boxed them in from both sides, and the first gunshot punched through the glass, everything became fragments, moments without order, sound without meaning. Eddie died from the first shot. His head snapped forward onto the steering wheel, and his foot pressed harder on the gas instead of releasing it. The Escalade lurched right, tires screaming against wet pavement. Ray managed to draw his weapon. He fired 3 times through the shattered window before bullets found his neck and shoulder. Blood sprayed across the windshield in dark streaks, mixing with rain and broken glass. Marcus threw himself to the floor of the vehicle, his face pressed against carpet that smelled like leather conditioner and copper. Glass rained down on his back. The sound of gunfire was so loud it stopped being sound and became pressure, became weight, became the air itself trying to crush him. The Escalade slammed into the concrete divider. Metal screamed. The engine died. And then silence. Marcus lay there, breathing in gunpowder and blood and the chemical sweetness of deployed airbags. His ears rang with a high, constant tone. His hands were shaking, though he didn't realize it yet. He counted. 16 seconds. 16 seconds, from the first bullet to the last echo. 16 seconds to kill 2 men, and almost kill a third. 16 seconds for the world Marcus Thorne had built to crack right down the center. Henry Ford Hospital, 2:51 in the morning. The fluorescent lights above Marcus hummed with the particular frequency of places where people come to die or be saved, and nobody knows which until it's over. The smell of antiseptic burned his nostrils. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped in steady rhythm, counting someone else's heartbeats. Marcus kept his eyes closed, not because he couldn't open them, not because the doctors had told him to, but because 37 years in this world had carved certain instincts into his bones, and right now every instinct screamed the same thing. Wait, listen, learn. Doctor. William Chen arrived at 2:53. Marcus recognized his footsteps before he heard his voice. Soft-soled shoes. The measured pace of a man who had delivered bad news too many times to rush toward it. Chen was 58 years old. He had been the Thorne family physician for 25 years, back when Marcus's father still ran the organization from a grocery store in Mexican town, back when loyalty meant something more than a line item in a budget. The examination was thorough. Penlight across closed eyelids, reflex hammer against knees, fingers pressing along the spine, vertebra by vertebra, no spinal damage, Chen murmured, more to himself than to Marcus. Optic nerves intact, some superficial lacerations on the forehead and hands, bruised ribs, minor concussion. A pause. You'll make a full recovery within 2 weeks. Marcus didn't respond, didn't move, didn't open his eyes. Outside the hospital room, the hallway lived a separate life. A life that people assumed Marcus couldn't hear. Warren Hayes, the family's chief attorney, was speaking into his phone. His voice carried the particular tone of a man who believed walls were thicker than they actually were. We need a contingency plan. If he doesn't recover fully, the assets have to be protected first. The power structure has to remain intact. A pause. Papers shuffling. Dominic should take temporary control until we have an official medical assessment. Yes, I'll handle the paperwork. Marcus listened. Not a single sentence contained the words, "Is he in pain?" Not a single question asked whether Eddie had family that needed to be notified, whether Ray was still alive, whether Marcus was scared or hurt or needed anything at all. There was only money, power, and who would sit in the chair if the chair was empty? Marcus lay there as every word seeped into him like slow poison, and something inside him, something he had suspected for years but had never dared to confirm, finally hardened into a decision. He opened his eyes, just enough to look at Dr. Chen standing beside the bed, arranging the medical chart. From this moment on, Marcus said, his voice low and clear, without the slightest hesitation, you will announce to everyone that Marcus Thorne is completely blind and paralyzed in both legs due to severe spinal trauma. No one will be allowed an independent examination. You will be the only doctor in charge of my medical file. Chen looked at him. 15 minutes passed in silence. Marcus knew because he counted every minute on the heart monitor above the bed. 15 minutes, while the 58-year-old doctor stood there, weighing medical ethics against a debt he could never repay. A debt from 20 years earlier, when his daughter, 14 at the time, had been taken by men who wanted leverage over Marcus's father, and it was Marcus himself, then 17, who found her in a warehouse in Hamtramck, before the police even knew what had happened. Chen had never asked what Marcus did to those men. Marcus had never told him. After 15 minutes, Chen gave a single nod, then he stepped into the hallway, and Marcus heard him tell Warren Hayes and 2 others that the situation was very bad. that Marcus had lost his sight completely, that he had lost all function in both legs, that the chances of recovery were essentially zero. There are transactions both sides understand without words. Silence itself is the contract. Marcus lay in the hospital bed with his eyes closed and his ears wide open. The world outside his room had already begun to move without him. He could hear it through the thin walls, through the door that nurses left slightly ajar, through the gap between what people said to his face and what they said when they thought he couldn't hear. Keyboards clicking, the rapid-fire rhythm of fingers typing messages that would never be read to him. Phone calls in hushed voices that grew louder when the callers walked further down the hallway, believing distance meant privacy. Footsteps, so many footsteps, coming and going, rushing past his door without pausing, the hurried pace of people who had somewhere more important to be. Not once did Marcus hear anyone stop outside his room and ask, "How is he doing? Is he in pain? Does he need anything?" The vacancy of power mattered more than the man who had held it. Flowers began arriving on the first day. White roses, lilies. Arrangements so expensive they came in crystal vases instead of glass. Each one carried a card printed by florists who had probably never met the senders. "Wishing you a speedy recovery. Our thoughts are with you. Get well soon." Generic words, printed sentiments, not a single handwritten note among them. The nurses read the cards aloud to him because they believed he couldn't see them himself. Marcus listened and counted. 14 arrangements on the first day, 9 more on the second. By the 5th day, the flowers had stopped coming, but the old ones remained. His phone buzzed with calls. 47 on the first day. Marcus had over 900 numbers in his contacts. Business partners, subordinates, men who called themselves friends. Men who had drunk whiskey in his penthouse and sworn they would live and die for the Thorne family. 47 out of 900 was already an answer. By the 3rd day, the number dropped to 28. By the 7th day, 11. Most were short voicemail messages. "Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. Thinking of you, brother." The kind of sentences people leave so their conscience can feel it has done enough without having to do anything at all. The flowers on the windowsill began to wilt. Petals curled downward like fingers losing their grip. The water in the vases turned cloudy, then green, then began to smell. Nobody changed it. The nurses didn't because it wasn't their job. Family didn't because no family came. Friends didn't because the friends had stopped coming after day 3. Marcus lay in the darkness behind his closed eyes and listened to the machine running. Not the medical machines keeping track of his heart rate and oxygen levels. A different machine. The one built of phone calls and meetings and signatures on documents. The one that had started spinning the moment Dr. Chen announced his condition. It wasn't a machine built to save him. It was a machine built to replace him. Every clicking keyboard was someone calculating who would control what. Every hushed phone call was someone positioning themselves for the aftermath. Every pair of footsteps rushing past his door was someone who had already written him off. The flowers kept dying on the windowsill, brown edges spreading inward, stems going soft, the sweet smell of fresh blooms rotting into something closer to decay. Dying flowers in the hospital room of a mafia boss smelled exactly like dying flowers on a grave. The same kind of neglect, the same kind of rot. Vanessa Cole arrived on the 2nd day at 10:32 in the morning. Marcus heard her before he saw her, before he smelled her, before the performance began. The sound of Louboutin heels on hospital linoleum. That sharp, confident clicking that only $800 shoes could make. Steady, measured. The rhythm of a woman who had spent her entire life practicing how to make every step look like she was walking onto a runway. Then came the perfume. Tom Ford tobacco vanille. Sweet and heavy. The kind of scent that announced itself before the person wearing it entered the room. It swept through the doorway like an advance team, preparing the space for her arrival. And finally, the crying. Soft sobs, delicate sniffles, the precise amount of tears a fiancé should produce when visiting her injured beloved. But Marcus noticed something the moment Vanessa sat beside his bed and took his hand. The perfume was intact, undiluted, perfect. Someone who had been truly crying, truly panicked, truly devastated by the news that the man she loved was blind and paralyzed, would have forgotten to put on perfume, would have rushed out of the house with wet cheeks and tangled hair in yesterday's clothes. Vanessa's perfume was flawless, which meant her grief was rehearsed. She held his hand with fingers still warm from the heated steering wheel of her Mercedes. Her nails were perfect. Fresh manicure, French tips, the kind of attention to detail that required an hour at the salon and a clear, untroubled mind. Marcus pretended to reach for the water glass on the bedside table. He reached 5 centimeters to the left of where it actually sat. His fingers searched through empty air, grasping at nothing, the movement of a man who truly couldn't see. And he heard Vanessa inhale, not the sharp gasp of someone heartbroken by watching her lover struggle, not the caught breath of grief or pain. It was the held breath of calculation, the same sound a person makes when reading an unexpected number on a bill, when realizing an investment is losing value. She guided his hand to the glass. Her touch was gentle. Her voice was soothing, but Marcus heard the machinery turning behind her words. Vanessa stayed for 2 hours that day. She said everything a fiancé should say. "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together. The doctors will find a way." But she made 3 phone calls in the hallway. 3 calls she believed he couldn't hear because the door was closed and he was blind. The first call was to reschedule her hair appointment. Couldn't make Thursday. How about Saturday instead? The second call was to her best friend. Vanessa recounted the situation in the voice of someone narrating current events. Factual, distant, the way a person describes a car accident they drove past on the highway. The third call was different. Her voice dropped lower, softer, more intimate. She called someone babe, before quickly changing the subject when footsteps approached. A nurse walked past. Vanessa ended the call. On the third day, the call Marcus had been waiting for finally came. Vanessa stood in the hallway, speaking to her own attorney, not Warren Hayes, her personal lawyer. How would the prenuptial agreement be triggered if Marcus becomes permanently disabled? What rights do I have? What percentage would I receive? How long would the process take? Her voice was calm, clear, professional, as though she were reviewing an apartment lease instead of discussing a future with the man she was supposed to marry. Marcus lay in the hospital bed, eyes behind black sunglasses staring at the white ceiling, and he wasn't angry. That was the thing that frightened him most. He wasn't angry because he had known, had always known. He had just never dared to confirm it. On the 4th day, Vanessa didn't come. A message arrived through her secretary instead. Short, polite, empty, Miss. Cole is feeling unwell today and sends her deepest apologies. She will visit as soon as she's able. Marcus lay in the hospital bed and listened to the nurse read the message aloud. He didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't ask any follow-up questions. He simply filed the information away in the same mental folder where he kept every other piece of evidence he had been collecting. On the 5th day, Vanessa appeared for the last time. Marcus heard the Louboutins before anything else, but the rhythm was different now. Faster, more decisive. The footsteps of someone who had already made a decision and had come only to execute it. The door opened, the perfume entered. Then Vanessa. She sat beside the bed, took his hand one final time. Her fingers were cool and dry. Her grip was firm but brief, like a handshake at the end of a business meeting. And then she began to speak. The performance was flawless. Her voice trembled at exactly the right moments. Her eyes were red enough to seem believable, but not red enough to make her mascara run. She had calibrated her grief with the precision of a woman who had spent years learning how to cry on cue without ruining her makeup. "I love you, Marcus. You know I do." Her voice caught on the word love, a small hitch, perfectly timed. "But I'm not strong enough for this. I thought I was, but I'm not." She paused. Let the silence breathe. "I'm afraid I'll become a burden instead of a support. I'm afraid I'll start resenting you, and then resenting myself for resenting you. And then everything we had will turn into something ugly." Another pause, a delicate sniffle. "You deserve someone stronger, someone who can be there for you completely." And I realized, these past few days, that person isn't me. Every sentence fit perfectly into the script of someone who wanted to leave while still preserving the image of being the victim. Every word designed to make the abandonment sound like a sacrifice. Then Vanessa reached into her purse. The ring emerged. 4.1 carats, emerald cut, platinum band. Marcus had paid $230,000 for it 18 months ago, at a jeweler on 5th Avenue in New York, because Vanessa had insisted Detroit didn't have anything worthy of her finger. She placed it on the oak table beside the bed. The sound of diamond touching wood was small, dry, precise. Not loud, but clear. Like the final period placed at the end of a story both of them had known was over long before either was willing to write the last sentence. "I'll always care about you," Vanessa said. The words were already fading as she stood, already dissolving into the air-conditioned silence of the hospital room. "I hope you understand." She didn't wait for a response. The Louboutins clicked across the linoleum. Faster now, eager, the rhythm of escape. The sound grew fainter with each step, until it disappeared completely into the hum of the hospital's air filtration system. Marcus lay motionless. He waited. 25 minutes. He counted every one of them on the heart monitor above his bed. He waited for the pain to arrive. for his chest to tighten, for something inside him to crack the way things crack when you lose someone you love. But it never came. Nothing cracked, nothing tightened, nothing broke. There was only a strange, light emptiness in the place where love should have been. A hollow space that had perhaps always been hollow, only now he was finally allowing himself to notice. And Marcus realized that what hurt wasn't losing Vanessa. What hurt was not feeling any pain when she left, because that meant he had never truly loved her. Or worse, that he had forgotten how to love long before she ever entered his life. The 4.1-carat ring was never love. It was just another transaction in the life of a man surrounded by nothing but transactions. Dominic Russo arrived on the third day at 4:23 in the afternoon. Marcus recognized the footsteps immediately. Oxford shoes on hospital linoleum. Heavy, confident. The stride of a 42-year-old man who had grown accustomed to entering every room as though it already belonged to him. The door swung open without a knock. Dominic never knocked. Hadn't knocked in 12 years. That was the privilege of brotherhood. Or so Marcus had always believed. The smell came next. Creta Ventus. Rich and sharp, with notes of pineapple and birch that cost $400 a bottle. Marcus had given him that cologne for his birthday last year. Had watched Dominic unwrap it at the steakhouse on Griswold, surrounded by captains and lieutenants who raised their glasses and called them brothers. Brothers. The word tasted different now. Dominic crossed the room in 4 steps. His weight settled into the chair beside the bed with the ease of a man who had already calculated how long this visit would take and had scheduled his next appointment accordingly. And then Marcus heard it. The sound of a laptop opening, metal hinges clicking apart, keys settling into position. The laptop opened before the first question was asked. "How are you holding up?" Dominic's voice was flat, efficient. The voice of a man reading from a checklist. What did the doctors say? He didn't pause for answers, didn't wait for Marcus to respond. The questions were formalities, speed bumps on the way to the real purpose of the visit. Marcus counted the sentences. 12 sentences in 16 minutes. The first 2 were expressions of concern. How are you feeling? Is there anything you need? Both delivered in a tone as warm as refrigerated meat. The remaining 10 were about paperwork. Temporary authority for Dominic to oversee operations while Marcus recovered. Signatures required on 3 documents he had already prepared, already printed, already slid into a leather folder that smelled like ambition. "Just need your signature here," Dominic said, guiding a pen into Marcus's hand. "And here, and one more at the bottom of page 3. Marcus signed, but he signed in the wrong place, deliberately, 2 centimeters to the left of the signature line, the kind of mistake a truly blind man would make. And he waited to see if Dominic would say, "Let me read that to you again," or, "Do you want me to explain what you're signing?" Or anything at all that suggested he cared whether Marcus understood the documents that would transfer power into Dominic's hands. Dominic said nothing of the sort. He simply took Marcus's hand, moved it 2 centimeters to the right, positioned it precisely on the line, and said, "Right here, brother." The word brother landed like a counterfeit bill on a glass counter. When the paperwork was complete, Dominic closed the laptop, slid the documents into his leather folder, stood, and then he did what he had done at the end of every meeting with Marcus for the past 12 years. He shook his hand. Dominic reached down, took Marcus's right hand, and squeezed. The grip was firm enough. The duration was correct. Exactly 3 seconds, as always. But the palm was dry. Completely dry. Not a trace of sweat. Not the slightest dampness. Dry as the hand of a man completing an ordinary task on an ordinary day. Marcus had shaken enough hands in his life to know what they revealed. The hands of worried men are wet. The hands of frightened men are cold. The hands of men in pain for someone else tremble. But the hands of men who feel nothing are dry. Dry and smooth and steady. Dry like shaking hands with a business partner in a conference room. Not holding the hand of a brother in a hospital bed. "We'll get through this," Dominic said, his final sentence. Number 12. Then he released Marcus's hand and walked out. His Oxford shoes clicked down the hallway, growing fainter with each step until they disappeared into the mechanical rhythm of the hospital. 14 minutes, from arrival to departure. When Vanessa left, Marcus felt nothing. But when Dominic left, Marcus felt something deeper than pain. The cold confirmation that the man he had called brother for 12 years had never truly been his brother at all. 2 weeks after the ambush, a black Suburban with tinted windows pulled into the underground garage of the Renaissance Center. Marcus sat in the back seat, black sunglasses covering eyes that could see everything. His hands rested on his thighs, motionless, his spine pressed against the leather seat in the rigid posture of a man who had forgotten how to relax. 2 bodyguards flanked him, new men, Names he hadn't bothered to learn. They weren't Ray. Ray was dead. Ray had bled out in the passenger seat of the Escalade with 3 bullets in his neck and shoulder, gurgling words that never became sentences. These new men moved with professional efficiency. They opened doors, unfolded the wheelchair, positioned it beside the vehicle with mechanical precision. Their hands touched Marcus only when necessary, brief and impersonal, like handling cargo that happened to breathe. From the hospital to the Suburban, from the Suburban to the private elevator, through the lobby, up 38 floors. Not a single word was spoken to him. Not, "How are you feeling, Mr. Thorne?" Not, "Welcome home, sir." Not even, "Watch your step," or "Almost there." Nothing. Marcus existed in their presence the way furniture exists in a room. Something to be moved. Something to be positioned. Something that occupied space without requiring acknowledgement. The elevator doors opened onto the 38th floor. 5,000 square feet spread before him like a showroom after closing time. $8 million in furniture. Italian marble floors that reflected the gray October light from floor-to-ceiling windows. Modern art on walls that had never heard laughter. But the first thing Marcus noticed wasn't what he saw. It was what he heard. Or rather, what he didn't hear. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of a home at rest. Not the comfortable quiet of a space waiting for its owner to return. This was a different kind of silence. Heavy. Thick. The silence of places where no one has laughed in years. Where no one has called out a name or sung in the shower or argued about what to watch on television. No music playing. No television murmuring in another room. No footsteps padding down the hallway. No voice calling his name. Just the low hum of the air purifier doing its expensive work. And beneath that, barely audible, the soft whistle of wind from Lake Michigan slipping through the seal of the windows. A thin, steady sound. Like the breathing of a house that had died long ago but didn't know it yet. The bodyguards wheeled Marcus into the center of the living room and left. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime. Their footsteps faded, and then there was nothing. Marcus sat in the wheelchair, black sunglasses hiding eyes that were wide open, and looked at the world he had built. The dining table. 10 chairs arranged with geometric precision around dark walnut wood. He had eaten at that table perhaps 300 times in the 5 years since he bought this penthouse. Always alone, always in the same seat. Always facing the windows so he could watch the river while he chewed. The abstract painting on the wall opposite. $200,000. Splashes of red and black that the gallery owner had called a meditation on urban chaos. Marcus had never understood it. Had never tried. Had bought it because the price tag said he should. The bedroom down the hall. King-sized bed. Egyptian cotton sheets with a thread count he couldn't remember. Vanessa had chosen them. Vanessa had chosen most things in this penthouse. And now Vanessa was gone. And everything she had touched remained like fingerprints on a crime scene. 5,000 square feet, every inch of it expensive, every corner of it curated, every surface of it designed to impress people who would never actually live here, because this had never been a home. It was a display case, a trophy room, a monument to wealth that existed only to prove that wealth existed. Marcus sat in the wheelchair in the center of his monument, surrounded by $8 million of proof, and realized something he had been avoiding for years. This place was a tomb, and he was sitting in the darkness he had chosen for himself, already buried alive. On the morning of the 8th day, at 6:52, Marcus heard a sound he had heard hundreds of times over the past 2 years. But this was the first time he truly listened. The service door key turning in the lock. 2 rotations. A soft click. The hinge easing open just far enough for one person to slip inside without letting the door bump against the wall. Marcus sat in his wheelchair in the living room, facing the windows where the first gray light of October dawn was beginning to spread across the Detroit River. His black sunglasses were already in place. His hands rested on the armrests. His ears, sharpened by weeks of pretending to be blind, caught every sound with surgical precision. First came the smell. Not Tom Ford tobacco vanille. Not Chanel. No, 5. Not any of the perfumes that cost more than most people's rent. This was different. Dove soap. The bar kind. Sold at Walgreens for $3.49. Fabuloso all-purpose cleaner. The purple bottle with the lavender scent that reminded Marcus of his grandmother's kitchen in Mexican Town 30 years ago. And beneath those, barely detectable, Gain laundry detergent. The original scent. The kind that came in the orange bottle. The smell of someone who had to wake before dawn to scrub other people's floors. Then came the footsteps. Light, almost soundless. Soft rubber soles on Italian granite. The steps of someone who had learned to move through other people's homes without leaving a trace, without disturbing, without being noticed. the footsteps of a person who understood that invisibility was part of the job description. And finally, the voice. Female, medium pitch. Not high, not thin, not rushed. Calm in the way that only comes from routine, from doing the same thing so many times that the words no longer require thought. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I'll start in the kitchen." That was all. No, "How are you feeling?" No heavy sigh of sympathy. No lowered voice dripping with the particular pity people reserve for the disabled and the dying. No dramatic pause to acknowledge the tragedy of a once powerful man now confined to a wheelchair. Just a simple statement on an ordinary morning, as though the man in the wheelchair wearing black sunglasses in the middle of the living room at nearly 7 in the morning was a perfectly normal part of the workday. Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to catch her shape in his peripheral vision. Elena Cruz, 23 years old. Brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Gray uniform from Home Care Solutions, the cleaning company that serviced the building. White sneakers that had once been white but were now faded to the yellow of age and wear, frayed at the heels from too many hours on too many floors. He had walked past her hundreds of times in the 2 years she had worked in this penthouse, had seen her on his way to meetings, on his way to dinners, on his way to the elevator that carried him down to a world where people bowed and scraped and called him sir. He had never once truly looked at her, had never asked her name, had never said anything beyond thank you when she placed a glass of water on his desk, and even that thank you had been spoken without lifting his eyes from the laptop screen. A reflex more than a sentiment, a courtesy so automatic it meant nothing at all. She was part of the furniture, part of the floor, part of the invisible machinery that kept his world running while he focused on the visible machinery of power and money. But that morning, in the penthouse as silent as a tomb, the sound of soft rubber soles on granite and the words "I'll start in the kitchen" became the only sounds carrying the breath of life in all 5,000 square feet. Elena came on schedule the first week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. She arrived at 6:52 each morning, moving through the penthouse with the quiet efficiency Marcus had never noticed before. The sound of water running in the kitchen sink, the soft scrape of a rag being wrung over the edge of a bucket, the bottle of cleaning solution being set down on the granite counter. Every sound small, steady, rhythmic, like music made by someone who had turned work into ritual, not because she loved it, but because it was the only way to survive each day without losing her mind. She cleaned. She left. She said nothing beyond the necessary. Then the second week began, and something changed. Elena started coming on Tuesday, then Thursday, then Saturday. Days that were not on the schedule, days that no one was paying her for, days that the cleaning company had not assigned and would never know about, and each time she came outside the schedule, she left something on the kitchen table. The first time, it was a small food container with the lid sealed tight. A handwritten note was tucked beneath it, the letters careful and clear. Hot rice, 2 minutes in the microwave. The second time, a container of chicken soup. The note said, "Eat while it's warm, no need to heat." The third time, a loaf of homemade bread wrapped in a clean dish towel. The note was shorter this time, nothing fancy, just bread. Marcus couldn't read the notes himself. At least, that was what everyone believed, so the nurse on duty read them aloud to him, her voice carrying that slightly patronizing tone people use when speaking to someone they assume cannot do anything for themselves. But Marcus heard what mattered, the voice behind those notes. There was no request attached, no sign this paper for me, no introduce me to someone important, no invoice hidden beneath the smile, no calculation wrapped in kindness, just rice, soup, bread, food left on a table by a woman who was not being paid to care, but cared anyway. What kept Marcus awake at night was not the food itself. It was the way Elena was kind. She never touched him. Not once. She didn't push his wheelchair when she walked past, didn't take his hand to guide him, didn't pat his shoulder with that particular gesture people reserve for the pitiful, didn't reach out to steady him when he pretended to lean off balance. Anyone else visiting a blind and paralyzed man would have touched, would have held, would have demonstrated their compassion through physical contact, because that was what good people did. That was how pity expressed itself, through hands that reached out whether you wanted them to or not. But Elena never pitied him. She treated him exactly the way she had treated him before the wheelchair, before the black sunglasses, before the world decided Marcus Thorne was broken. She treated him like a man who hired her to clean his home. She fulfilled that duty, and she added a little more. Just enough more that it could no longer be called obligation. It had to be called choice. The difference was everything. Vanessa had touched him constantly in the hospital, held his hand, stroked his arm, pressed her cheek against his. Every touch a performance, every gesture designed to be seen. Dominic had shaken his hand with exactly 3 seconds of pressure, a ritual, a formality, a transaction disguised as brotherhood. But Elena gave without touching, without expecting, without asking for anything in return. And that absence of expectation was more present than any hand that had ever reached for him. By the end of the 3rd week, Marcus did something he had never done in the 2 years Elena had worked in his penthouse. He asked her a personal question. The question left Marcus's mouth before he could stop it. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the living room windows, black sunglasses in place, hands resting on the armrests with the stillness of a man who had trained himself to reveal nothing. His voice was calm, measured, the voice he used in negotiations when the stakes were high and the margin for error was 0. But inside, he was not calm at all. This was the first time in weeks he had asked anyone a question he truly wanted answered. Not a question designed to test, not a question meant to expose, but a genuine question, born from genuine curiosity about another human being. The feeling was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, like wearing a suit that no longer fit. Elena was dusting the bookshelves in the living room. Leather-bound volumes Marcus had never read, arranged by color because Vanessa had thought it looked better that way. Her rag moved in slow, methodical strokes across the spines. When he asked the question, her hand stopped. Just for half a second. A pause so brief that someone not paying attention would have missed it entirely. Then the rag continued moving. "Big house," she said. Her voice was calm, casual, the tone of someone commenting on the weather or the traffic. "Lots of dust. 3 days isn't enough." Marcus heard the words, and he knew immediately that they were a lie. The penthouse had a $60,000 air filtration system built into the walls. It cycled the air 4 times per hour, trapping particles smaller than a human hair. Dust didn't survive in this apartment. Dust couldn't survive even if it wanted to. The air was cleaner than the air in hospital operating rooms. Elena knew this. She had been cleaning this penthouse for 2 years. She knew every corner, every surface, every machine that hummed behind the walls. She knew the excuse was transparent, and she offered it anyway. Marcus could have called her out, could have said, "We both know that's not true," could have pressed for the real answer, the way he pressed in every business meeting, every negotiation, every conversation where information was currency and weakness was opportunity. But he didn't. He let the lie stand. And Elena didn't take it back. The small dishonesty hung in the air between them, weightless and fragile, not a barrier, but a bridge. A strange, delicate bridge that neither of them acknowledged building, because the truth was something neither of them was ready to say out loud. Elena couldn't say, "I come because you seem alone, and I know what alone feels like, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone." And Marcus couldn't say, "I asked because you're the only person who treats me like a human being instead of a problem to be solved or a prize to be won." Those words were too heavy, too honest, too dangerous for 2 people who were still strangers, still circling each other at a distance that felt safe. So instead, they had this, a lie about dust, a question left half-answered, a silence that followed, not awkward but somehow warm, the kind of silence that exists only between people who have reached an understanding without needing to explain it. Elena finished dusting the shelf, moved to the next one. Her rag continued its slow, steady rhythm against the leather spines. Marcus sat in his wheelchair and listened to the soft sounds of her work, the whisper of cloth on books, the quiet padding of her sneakers on the marble floor, the distant hum of the air filtration system that made her excuse impossible and her presence inexplicable. And the small lie, "Big house, lots of dust," became the first thread connecting 2 people who had never truly seen each other. Saturday, the 3rd week, the private elevator chimed. Marcus heard the sound from his wheelchair in the living room, and something inside him went still. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 4 years. The particular electronic tone that meant someone with a family access code was ascending to the 38th floor. Then came voices, children's voices, not 1, but 2. The first voice was high and bright, chattering without pause about a squirrel spotted on the highway near the Lake Forest exit. It ran so fast. "Grandma, faster than your car. Do you think squirrels ever get tired? I bet they don't. I bet they can run forever." The second voice was silent. If not for the sound of a second pair of small footsteps on the marble floor, Marcus would have thought only 1 child had entered. But he heard them both. 1 set of feet running and skipping, another set walking slowly, deliberately, as though counting each step before taking the next. Then came the perfume, Estee Lauder white linen, light and clean, with notes of rose and jasmine that hadn't changed since the 1980s. The same perfume Rosa Thorne had worn when Marcus's father was still selling groceries from a tiny store in Mexican town, when money was tight and dreams were big and the future stretched ahead like a promise waiting to be kept. Rosa Thorne, 67 years old, gray hair pinned back in the elegant style she had worn for 40 years. A face lined with decades of worry and love and secrets she would never tell. She had driven her Buick Enclave from Bloomfield Hills to Detroit, 45 minutes on I-75. Through traffic she complained about every time but navigated without hesitation. Marcus turned his head toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Small footsteps, running footsteps. And then Lucas was there, 8 years old. Dark hair that fell across his forehead in the same unruly way Marcus's had at that age. Brown eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Wearing jeans and a Detroit Tigers t-shirt that was too big for him, the sleeves hanging past his elbows. Lucas didn't stop at the doorway, didn't pause, didn't ask permission. He ran straight to the wheelchair and climbed onto Marcus's lap with the complete, unquestioning trust that only children possess. His small arms wrapped around Marcus's neck, his cheek pressed against Marcus's chest. His body smelled like Johnson's baby shampoo and the grape popsicle he had eaten in the car. "Dad," Lucas said, his voice muffled against Marcus's shirt. "Why are you wearing sunglasses inside? You look like a spy in the movies." Then he laughed. The pure, uncomplicated laugh of an 8-year-old who found something funny and saw no reason to hide it. Marcus lifted his arms. These arms had ordered men killed, had signed contracts that laundered millions, had shaken hands with senators and criminals and everyone in between, had held weapons and briefcases and glasses of whiskey that cost more than most people's rent. But when they touched the back of an 8-year-old boy who weighed 40 pounds soaking wet, they trembled. His hands shook as they pressed against Lucas's small back. His fingers curled into the fabric of the oversized Tiger's shirt. His throat tightened around words he couldn't find. 4 years. 4 years since Katrina had taken Lucas and left. 4 years of visits arranged by lawyers, supervised by secretaries, limited to holidays and birthdays that felt more like business meetings than family time. 4 years of watching his son grow up in photographs instead of in person. And now Lucas was here, on his lap, arms around his neck, laughing about sunglasses. For the first time in 4 years, the penthouse on the 38th floor began to make sounds that 5,000 square feet had never known. Rosa waited 20 minutes. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Detroit River crawl toward Lake Erie, her hands clasped in front of her the way they always clasped when she was holding back words that needed to be said. The scent of white linen drifted through the living room, mixing with the sterile air from the filtration system. Lucas stayed on Marcus's lap for those 20 minutes, talking about everything and nothing, the squirrel on the highway, the new kid at school who could burp the alphabet, the video game his grandmother wouldn't let him play because it had too much violence. Then Rosa turned. "Lucas, mijo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Go find your room, the one with the big window. I need to talk to your father." Lucas looked up at Marcus with eyes that held a question he didn't know how to ask. Then he slid off the wheelchair and walked down the hallway, his small footsteps echoing against the marble. Rosa waited until the sound faded. Then she stepped behind Marcus's wheelchair and pushed him into the hallway, away from the living room, away from where Lucas might hear. She stopped near the service door, the cold hallway, the place where secrets were meant to be spoken and forgotten. When she spoke, her voice shifted, English laced with Spanish, the way she always spoke when she was serious, the voice of a woman who had raised 5 children and buried a husband and survived things she never talked about. "That boy needs his father," Rosa said. Her hand rested on Marcus's shoulder, the weight of it heavier than her 70-year-old frame suggested. "He doesn't need a father who can walk. He doesn't need a father who can see. He needs a father who is present, who shows up, who stays." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. "I raised him for 4 years," Rosa continued, "since Katrina walked out and didn't look back. I fed him. I bathed him. I held him when he had nightmares about monsters under the bed. I love that boy more than my own life." Her voice cracked on the word life, just slightly, just enough. "But I'm not his father, and nothing can replace a father." She moved around the wheelchair until she stood in front of him. Her eyes met his sunglasses, and Marcus knew she was looking for him behind the dark lenses, looking for the son she had raised, the man he had become, the man she wasn't sure he still was. "This is your last chance," Rosa said. "If you waste it, I will never forgive you." She paused, her chin lifted slightly. "And neither will God." Then she leaned forward and kissed his forehead. Her lips were dry and warm. Her hand trembled on his shoulder. The scent of white linen lingered in the cold hallway, like a ghost that refused to leave. Rosa straightened, turned, walked to the private elevator. She pressed the button, the doors opened, she stepped inside, and she didn't look back. Women of her generation, women who had survived what she survived, never looked back after saying what needed to be said. The elevator doors closed, the mechanical hum faded, and Rosa Thorne descended 38 floors, leaving her grandson behind. Lucas stayed. From that Saturday afternoon forward, the penthouse began to fill with sounds it had never known. Lucas singing the wrong words to a Drake song he had heard on the radio, his voice cracking on the high notes, not caring who heard. The scrape of a chair being dragged across the stone floor as he fought for the seat by the window where the light was best for drawing. Small footsteps running down the hallway at midnight because the darkness in his room was too thick and the distance to his father's door was too far. Marcus sat in the middle of those sounds. Black sunglasses, wheelchair, eyes open behind the lenses, seeing everything. And for the first time in 4 years, he heard the penthouse breathe. Wednesday, the first week after Lucas arrived, Elena was washing dishes in the kitchen, her hands moving through soapy water with the same steady rhythm Marcus had come to recognize. The sound of porcelain against porcelain, the soft splash of water, the quiet efficiency of someone who had cleaned 1,000 kitchens and would clean 1,000 more. Then came the footsteps, fast, uneven, the sound of socked feet on stone, sliding more than stepping. Lucas burst into the kitchen at full speed, his socks skating across the granite floor, his arms pinwheeled for balance, his hair stuck up in 3 directions from rolling on the living room sofa. He caught himself on the edge of the counter, breathing hard, grinning wide. Elena turned, dish towel in hand, water dripping from her fingers. Lucas looked at her with the particular intensity of a child encountering something new, his head tilted to the left, the universal gesture of an 8-year-old processing information. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was direct, curious, free of the politeness that adults use to wrap their questions in layers of softness. "I'm the person who cleans this house," Elena said. Lucas frowned. It was a serious frown, the kind of frown only an 8-year-old could produce and somehow make look genuinely serious. His eyebrows drew together, his mouth pressed into a thin line. His entire face became a study in concentration. "But people who clean don't cook," he said. "You cook for Dad. I saw the containers in the fridge, the ones with the little notes." Elena's hands stilled on the dish towel. "Grandma says only people who really like someone cook for them," Lucas continued, his logic unassailable in the way that children's logic always is. "So, are you Dad's girlfriend?" From the living room, Marcus heard every word. The penthouse had an open design. Sound traveled from the kitchen up to the high ceiling and spilled into the living room like water breaking over a dam. Every syllable, every pause, every breath. And Marcus laughed, not the polite laugh he had perfected over 10 years of parties and negotiations, not the low sound in his throat that he made when someone told a joke he was supposed to find funny, not the controlled chuckle that passed for amusement in boardrooms and back rooms. This was different. This laugh came from his stomach, from his chest, from somewhere deeper than both of those places. It bubbled up without permission, without calculation, without any thought of who might hear or what they might think. It was the kind of laugh Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had released. Maybe in his 20s, maybe before his father died, maybe before the world he lived in had swallowed everything that laughter needed to survive. Elena heard the laughter from the kitchen. She stopped, dish towel still in her hand, her eyes turned toward the living room, toward the sound she had never heard in 2 years of working here, in 2 years of arriving at 6:52 and leaving by noon, in 2 years of moving through this penthouse like a ghost who left nothing behind but clean surfaces, in 2 years of watching Marcus Thorne exist in silence. She had never heard him laugh. Not once, not even close. Lucas looked back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, confused about what he had said that was so funny. His frown deepened, then relaxed, then turned into a small smile because laughter was contagious, even when you didn't understand the joke. That evening, no one planned it, no one suggested it. Elena carried a tray of enchiladas to the dining table. Lucas pulled out a chair and sat down without being told. Marcus wheeled himself to the head of the table. 3 people sat around a table meant for 10. And for the first time, the sound in the room wasn't one person chewing in silence. 11 o'clock. The 4th week. Lucas had been asleep for 2 hours. Elena sat in the kitchen, the yellow pendant lamp casting a warm circle of light around her. A cup of chamomile tea rested between her hands, long since gone cold. She wasn't drinking it, just holding it, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic as though she needed something to anchor herself to the present moment. Marcus wheeled into the kitchen. The soft hum of rubber on granite announced his arrival before he spoke. He stopped 4 feet away from her, close enough to talk, far enough not to invade. The distance they had both silently agreed upon over weeks without ever naming it. Silence settled between them. But it wasn't the heavy silence of strangers. It was the comfortable kind. The silence that exists only between people who have grown accustomed to each other's presence and no longer feel the need to fill every moment with words. Marcus broke it first. "What's your life like, Elena?" His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent weeks listening instead of speaking and had finally found a question worth asking. "Outside these walls?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the cold tea. Her finger traced the rim of the cup, slow circles going nowhere. Her breathing changed, deeper, slower, like someone deciding whether to open a door that had been locked for a very long time. Then she told him. Her voice didn't shake, didn't break, didn't rise or fall with dramatic emphasis. It stayed even, steady, like water moving through pipes. The voice of someone who had told this story to herself so many times in her own head that speaking it aloud no longer had the power to knock her down, only the power to make her tired. Diego Solano, her husband, shot 3 years ago on a Saturday night in November. 2 bullets to the chest in the parking lot behind a laundromat on Werner Highway. He died in the ambulance before it reached Sinai Grace Hospital. Diego wasn't a good man. Elena said that without hatred, without bitterness, just truth, plain and unvarnished. He hit her, not every day, but often enough that she learned to read his footsteps, to know which rhythm meant tonight would hurt and which meant she might sleep without bruises. He owed gambling money in 3 different places, borrowed from people who charged interest in broken bones and missing fingers. He drank more than he talked, and he lied more than he drank. But he was Mia's father, and one day, Mia would grow old enough to ask where her father went, and Elena would have to answer. And whatever answer she gave, there would always be a part of it she would have to swallow instead of say aloud. The police opened a case, investigated for 3 months, interviewed witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember anything, followed leads that went nowhere, then they closed it. Insufficient evidence. 2 words printed on white paper. Elena had read them over and over in her tiny kitchen in Mexican Town, at midnight, after Mia had gone to sleep. 2 words that meant her husband was dead, and no one would ever pay for it. 6 months later, one of Diego's old friends called her. A man named Marco, drunk at 2 in the morning, slurring words that carved themselves into her memory. Diego died because he owed money, borrowed to gamble, couldn't pay it back. They warned him twice. The 3rd time, there was no warning. The organization was the Thorne family. Elena said that name, Thorne. She said it in a flat voice, not emphasizing it, not softening it, not loading it with anger or accusation or anything at all, just flat. And Marcus felt that name, his name, the name he had carried for 37 years, for the first time with its true weight. Elena continued. Her voice stayed even. No trembling, no breaking. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this story in her own head so many times that the words had worn smooth, like river stones tumbled by years of current. 6 months after Diego died, her mother was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. The words landed in the kitchen like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, touching everything. The medication cost $3,800 a month. Medicaid covered part of it, only part. The rest came from Elena's pocket, from shifts worked at the cleaning company, from tips saved in a jar on the kitchen counter, from the slow, grinding arithmetic of poverty where every dollar was counted and recounted until the numbers stopped making sense. She needed a job with better insurance, better coverage, something that would keep her mother alive long enough for Mia to remember her grandmother's face. Home Care Solutions had a contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield. The premium was included in the employment package. The specialty medication was covered, and one of their clients was the penthouse on the 38th floor of the Renaissance Center, owned by Marcus Thorne. Elena looked at the cold tea in her hands. Her finger had stopped tracing the rim. Both hands wrapped around the cup now, knuckles whitening. "I knew from the first day I walked into this penthouse," she said. "I knew I was mopping the floors of the man who caused my husband's death. Not directly, not with his own hands, but the machine he built, the organization that bore his name, the system that collected debts with bullets when money wasn't paid. And I kept mopping, every day, every week, for 2 years." Her voice carried no accusation, no anger, just the flat exhaustion of someone who had made an impossible choice and learned to live with it. Because Mia needs her mother alive, and my mother needs her medicine, and sometimes surviving means swallowing what you should spit out. The silence stretched. The yellow lamp hummed overhead, The refrigerator clicked on, then settled into its steady hum. Then Elena spoke again. Her voice was different now, lighter, softer, something trembling at the edges that hadn't been there before. 6 months after Diego died, before I knew about my mother's cancer. She paused, drew a breath that caught somewhere in her chest. I stood on the Ambassador Bridge at 4 a.m, a day in December, cold enough to see my breath, cold enough to feel the wind cutting through my jacket like it wasn't there. Marcus went still in his wheelchair, the kind of stillness that comes from holding your breath without realizing it. I stood at the edge, the toes of my shoes touching the concrete barrier, the ones with the worn tips, the ones I still wear because I can't afford new ones. Her eyes were fixed on the T. She wasn't seeing it. She was seeing something else, somewhere else. A bridge over black water on a December night. The river looked like silence. That's what I thought. The water was so dark, so still. It looked like a place where there was no rent, no medicine bills, no daughter asking where her daddy went. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it, but I didn't jump. Not because I was brave. I wasn't brave. I was standing on that bridge because I had run out of brave. Her voice cracked. Just once. Just slightly. I didn't jump because I heard Mia in my head. Heard her crying when she woke up and couldn't find me. The cry of a 1-year-old calling for mama in an empty room. Another tear, then another. That sound pulled me back. Step by step. Until I was sitting on the cold concrete, crying by myself while the wind from the Detroit River cut through my bones. The silence that followed was so heavy Marcus could feel it on his skin. Not the silence of an empty penthouse, not the silence of a hospital room, but the silence of 2 people sitting in a kitchen with a dead man lying between them. Marcus swallowed. He heard his own heartbeat quicken, felt his stomach muscles tighten, as though someone had driven a fist into his gut from the inside. His hands gripped the armrests of the wheelchair, knuckles pressing white against the leather. His mind raced backward through months of reports, years of spreadsheets, the neat, clean documents Dominic sent every month, formatted in columns that made death look like accounting. Werner receivable closed, November. That was Diego Solano, a line item, a closed account, a problem solved. 3 words that meant a man bled out in a parking lot behind a laundromat while his wife waited at home for footsteps that would never come. Southwest debt resolution. March. Someone else. Someone Marcus never knew. Someone who had a name and a face and perhaps a daughter who asked where daddy went. Mexican town asset write-off. August. Another name he would never learn. Another family that woke up one morning to discover the world had subtracted someone from their lives. Every line in those Excel spreadsheets, every column of numbers, every notation that Dominic highlighted in green to indicate completion. They were not data anymore. They were a list of Diegos, of Elenas, of Mias, of mothers with cancer who couldn't afford medicine, of nights at 4 a.m. on bridges over black water. Marcus had built an empire, had constructed a machine so efficient that he never had to see the blood it produced. Dominic handled it. Dominic reported it. Dominic used clean language for dirty work, and Marcus signed off without asking questions, the way people eat meat without ever stepping inside a slaughterhouse. But now the slaughterhouse had a face, had brown eyes that looked at him across a kitchen table, had hands wrapped around a cold cup of chamomile tea, had a voice that described standing on the Ambassador Bridge at 4 a.m. because the water looked like silence. "You knew who I was," Marcus said. Not a question, a statement. His voice was low and thin, the voice of a man who had just had all the air pulled from his lungs. "From the first day," Elena said. She looked straight at his black sunglasses, straight at the dark lenses that hid eyes she believed couldn't see her. But she looked anyway, because when Elena Solano spoke the truth, she looked straight, always. "Then why?" Marcus asked. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with everything it carried. The food containers with handwritten notes, the days she came when no one paid her, the kindness she offered to the man whose name was carved into her husband's death. Elena was quiet for a moment. Her finger resumed its slow circle around the rim of the teacup. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders, which had been raised and tight, slowly lowered. When she spoke, her voice was even again, steady again, like the surface of Lake Michigan after the wind dies down. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned in the dark." She paused. Her eyes never left his sunglasses, not even the man who pushed other people into it. The words landed somewhere deep inside Marcus, deeper than his chest, deeper than his gut, somewhere in the place where guilt lived, where shame had been building for years without a name. That night, after Elena left, after Lucas had been checked on and found sleeping peacefully, Marcus did not sleep. Not the kind of sleeplessness where you toss and turn and finally drift off at 4 a.m. Not the restless hours that eventually surrender to exhaustion. This was different. This was eyes wide open in the darkness. Staring at a ceiling he couldn't stop seeing even when he closed his eyes, because every time he closed them, he saw a parking lot on Werner Highway, a Saturday night in November, 2 gunshots echoing off concrete walls, and a man he had never met collapsing onto cold ground. 4 nights without sleep, 4 nights of staring at the ceiling while the darkness pressed down like a weight he couldn't lift. 4 nights of closing his eyes and seeing Werner Highway, the parking lot, the laundromat, 2 bullets, a man falling. At 4:12 in the morning on the 5th day, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't let this game continue for 1 more hour. Not because he was afraid of Dominic. Marcus had never been afraid of Dominic. He had known for weeks about the meetings in Chinatown with Viktor Petrov, about the plan to divide territories, about the knife Dominic had held behind his wheelchair that night, blade drawn for 3 seconds before sliding back into its sheath. That wasn't fear. That was information, filed away, waiting to be used. But Elena was different. Every hour that passed while Marcus pretended to be blind and paralyzed was another hour that Elena, Mia, and Lucas stood in crosshairs they couldn't see. Another hour that Dominic watched and calculated and prepared for a future that would require cleaning up loose ends. Marcus had to tell Elena the truth before he dealt with Dominic, because if he dealt with Dominic first and confessed afterward, Elena would think the confession was just another move in a chess game, another manipulation, another layer of strategy wrapped in the appearance of honesty. And he needed her to know this was not strategy. This was a man trying to do the right thing, for the first time in his life. After 37 years of doing wrong, they had always held him. The muscles remembered walking even after weeks of pretending they had forgotten. 5:15. He stepped into the shower, standing. No plastic chair. No pretense of needing assistance. Hot water running down his back, washing away something that couldn't be washed away but needed the ritual anyway. 5:30. Jeans. White t-shirt. No suit. No tailored armor. No costume designed to intimidate or impress. Just a man. Just clothes. 5:45. He picked up the black sunglasses from the bedside table, held them in his hands, looked at them the way you look at a piece of yourself you're about to shed. Then he folded them carefully, set them down on the oak surface, and walked away. 6 in the morning. He sat at the dining table, the one with 10 chairs that had only ever held one person. No wheelchair beside him, no sunglasses hiding his eyes. Just Marcus Thorne, sitting in a chair, looking at the empty room with eyes that could see everything. And he waited. 6:52. The service door lock turned. 2 rotations. A soft click. The hinge easing open. The smell arrived first. Dove soap. Fabuloso. Gain detergent. The scent of early mornings and honest work. Then the footsteps. Soft rubber soles on granite. Light and practiced. Moving toward the kitchen with the automatic efficiency of routine. Elena stepped into the kitchen, set down her bag, pulled her hair tighter into its ponytail. Then she turned toward the dining room, following the habit of 2 years, checking the table before starting to clean, and stopped completely. Her body went rigid. Her hand froze halfway to the dish towel. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Marcus watched the moment unfold across her face like dominoes falling in sequence. First, confusion. He wasn't in the wheelchair. The wheelchair sat empty by the window, folded and abandoned. Then disorientation. He wasn't wearing the black sunglasses. His face was bare, exposed, unguarded. Then recognition. His eyes were open. His eyes were looking. His eyes were fixed directly on hers, truly looking, the way a blind man cannot look. "I can see," Marcus said. His voice was bare, stripped of pretense. No armor of authority, no shield of power, just words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. "I could always see. And I can walk. I could always walk." Elena stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. Her hand still hovered near the dish towel she had been reaching for. Her chest rose and fell with breaths that had become shallow, rapid, the breathing of someone whose mind was racing faster than her lungs could keep up. Silence followed, but it wasn't the comfortable silence they had shared over the past weeks. Not the warm quiet of 2 people who had grown accustomed to each other's presence. Not the peaceful pause between words that didn't need to be spoken. This silence was different. This silence was steel cooling, a door swinging shut, the warmth in a gaze turning to ice. Marcus watched it happen in Elena's eyes in real time. Those brown eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with ordinary kindness when no one else had offered ordinary kindness. The same eyes that had seen him in the wheelchair, and treated him like a man instead of a tragedy. The same eyes that had cried in this kitchen while telling him about Diego, and the bridge, and the black water that looked like silence. Those eyes changed. The warmth drained out of them. The softness hardened. What remained was something Marcus could only call steel. Not hot anger. Not the explosive rage that burns bright and fades fast. Cold anger. The kind of anger that belongs to someone who has been deceived too many times in her life to have energy left for screaming. The kind of anger that doesn't shatter things but freezes them, preserves them, locks them away behind walls that will never come down. Everything was fake, Elena said. Not a question, a statement. Her voice was low, even, controlled. The same tone she had used the night she told him about Diego. But this time there was no tremor at the edges, no crack in the armor, only flatness, absolute flatness, the blindness, the wheelchair. Every time I sat here cooking for you, every time I put a cold cloth on your son's forehead when he had a fever, every time I told you about my husband, about my mother, about the bridge, each sentence was shorter than the one before, as though she were cutting each thread that connected her to him with words instead of scissors. You thought human hearts were something to measure. You sat there behind those black glasses, watching me cry about Diego, and you weighed whether I was real. The word weighed hit harder than any other. Not shouted, just pressed, the way a knife presses into skin without force, only precision. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. Don't. 2 syllables, sharp as a blade. They cut across the air between them, and stopped whatever words had been forming in his throat. Elena looked at him for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Marcus watched everything he had built over the past weeks collapse. The enchilada dinners, Lucas's laughter, the notes on food containers, the lie about dust that had become their first thread of connection. All of it crumbled in 3 seconds under those steel eyes. Elena picked up her bag, turned her back, walked to the service door. She didn't slam it, didn't throw it, didn't let it crash against the frame with the violence her anger deserved. She closed it gently, a soft click of the lock. Like a period at the end of a sentence, like the final word of a story. And that gentle sound echoed through the penthouse longer than any gunshot Marcus had heard in 37 years. Because gunshots ring and fade, but the quiet closing of a door by someone too hurt to even rage keeps ringing forever. 48 hours after Elena closed the door, the penthouse returned to exactly what it had been before. Before the laughter, before the enchiladas, before the notes on food containers, before everything, silent, empty. A tomb on the 38th floor. Lucas stopped talking to Marcus. His bedroom door stayed closed, tighter than it had been when he first arrived. The crack that had once let hallway light slip through was gone, sealed shut by the betrayal of a father who had lied about everything. On the second night, at 2 a.m, Marcus stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. No wheelchair, no sunglasses, just a man looking out at the Detroit River, dark and indifferent, crawling toward a lake that didn't care whether he lived or died. He thought about Elena standing on the Ambassador Bridge that December night, the worn toes of her shoes touching the concrete barrier, the wind cutting through her jacket, the black water below looking like silence, like escape, like the end of everything that hurt. And for the first time, Marcus understood, not with his mind, with his bones, with his flesh, with the weight pressing down on his chest. He understood what it felt like when everything around you goes so quiet that you have to ask yourself whether you're still alive or just standing in the middle of emptiness, waiting for it to swallow you whole. Small footsteps behind him. Lucas. Dark blue pajamas, hair tangled from the pillow, eyes open in the darkness, watching his father the way children watch when they know something is wrong but don't have words for it. He didn't ask why his father was awake. Didn't ask if he was okay. He just pulled a small chair over and sat down beside him. 10 minutes of silence. Then Lucas spoke, his voice small but certain. Dad breathes different, like there's something heavy in his chest that can't come out. 8 years old, and this child could hear that his father was breaking. Marcus reached out and touched his son's head, the first time he had touched him because he wanted to, because he needed to, not because a secretary had arranged a visit or a holiday demanded a photograph. Lucas didn't pull away. He sat still and let his father's hand rest on his hair. In the darkness of the penthouse, at 2 a.m, it was the closest they had ever been. 1 week later, Marcus dealt with Dominic. No blood, no bullets, just truth spoken in a basement room with 2 men loyal to Rosa standing witness. 2 weeks later, he drove an old Ford F-150 to Mexican Town, parked 2 blocks away, climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. He knocked on a blue door with an Elsa sticker at the height of a 4-year-old's hand. Mia opened it, brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the blind man?" she asked, because every time she had seen him at the penthouse, he wore black sunglasses and sat in a wheelchair. "Not anymore," Marcus said. Elena appeared behind her daughter. Her eyes weren't warm, but they weren't steel anymore either. Something in between, something waiting. "I brought nothing," Marcus said. "No money, no promises, no plan. I came because if I don't, I'll stay the man I've been for 37 years, and I don't want to be that man anymore." Elena looked at him for 10 seconds. Then she pushed the door open 6 more inches. Not wide, not an invitation, just 6 inches. But in the world between these two people, 6 inches was an ocean, the distance between never and maybe, between ending and beginning again. And Marcus stood there before those 6 inches of open door, understanding that it was more than he deserved and exactly what he needed. Because the next step wasn't walking through the door, it was becoming the kind of man who would one day be worthy of having it opened all the way. This story teaches us that true transformation begins not when we gain power, but when we have the courage to set it aside. That trust, once broken, must be rebuilt brick by brick, with patience and humility. That the people who love us most are often those who expect nothing in return, and that sometimes 6 inches of hope is enough to start a lifetime of healing. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss our daily stories of love, redemption, and the beautiful complexity of being human. We want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced a moment when everything fell apart, only to discover what truly mattered? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories inspire us, and we read every single one. From the bottom of our hearts, we wish everyone watching good health, happiness in your daily life, and peace in your soul. Goodbye for now. We will see you again in the next video.